we can't scope it, so there's just no other way to price it. The answer, I think, is not absolute pure value-based pricing. I think you do have to price in a way that covers your costs in a method like this. But there's no reason why that should be the end of it, especially because so many of these agile-based engagements, like, they're just creating so much organizational value. They're creating products most of the time, right? So it's a lot of times it's kind of easy to quantify the success of the project. So why can't you get your costs covered but still get paid based on certain milestones, like getting something into the market, achieving a certain level of scale or sales volume, or et cetera? Like, there are all of these business case like metrics around these engagements where it should be easy to just say, at this point, let's just agree that, if we hit these things within this time frame, that's worth X. I'm just thinking of Elon Musk's newest pay plan. He's got, I don't know if it's 10 or 30 milestones, and he's getting no, like, it's the ultimate performance pay. He's getting no pay, I think. I think he gets paid $1 a year and he donates that dollar. He doesn't cash the check. But he will be the richest person on the planet if he hits all of these different milestones. And I was reading about that pay plan thinking, wow, this is how so many professional firms, creative firms, design and dev shops should work.
One of the things that I think you touch on in the book, but I really want to hear your personal experience around is, so there's the value to the customer, but I also want to talk about the value to the firm or the agency itself in terms of the culture that gets created outside of this and what that benefit has been. And what have you seen in that terms? Have you seen cultures change and for the better because of this? What's been that impact?
It's since the book has come out in the last 64 days, I'm most struck by the change in my own mindset and how just profound this idea of a cultural shift is. I'm working on an article on it, and the article is like loosely titled I could look it up. It's a financial progression of a creative professional, or something like that. And it's basically the stages of financial success that you go through as an independent creative professional or as the owner of a creative firm or any other professional firm. And the first one is like the efficient firm, where you become really efficient at capturing and billing as many hours as possible. And then the second one is charging based on value. So moving away from time altogether and charging based on the value that you create for your clients. And the third one is just my working title or label for it is just entrepreneurship. You start, and it comes on the heels fairly quickly after you move to value-based pricing. You start thinking like an entrepreneur, and when the next client opportunity comes to you, instead of thinking about what you might sell them or what their budget might be or how many hours or how many sprints you can sell, you start really thinking about the possibilities of this client's project, and you start to think about more entrepreneurial ways to be involved and to get paid. And there's a really great story in the book of a friend of mine who received an email from a friend of a client. He had this challenge, and my friend emailed back some free advice. He was trying to raise some money for a business venture, and my friend emailed back some free advice. And he as he was telling me the story, he said the last line of the email was, "Good luck with this. Let me know how it turns out." And he said, "No, before I press send, I deleted that line and I replaced it with this one. My fee for this idea and for helping you execute on it is $600,000. And when he told me that story, he was telling me the story via email. As soon as I read that, I picked up the phone and I called him and I said, "What did he say?"
Yeah.
He said, "The guy couldn't say yes fast enough."
That's great.
So I tell this story, and I kind of lost touch with my friend, hadn't talked to him in a while. And I tell his story in the book based on the last update I had from him, which was it had taken longer than he thought the project had grown larger. He had done a bunch of trips, all of his expenses were paid, but it was starting to pay off and he was starting to collect his money, and his fee was well in excess of, he was into seven figures. So I wrote something like that into the story, and I didn't let him know that I was using his story. I didn't name him, and I didn't double check to see, what the facts were, how much has he been paid, et cetera, how much was he likely to be paid, because I thought it doesn't matter. It's kind of the part that I know is true, and it's a good story and it illustrates it. And so I'm on a plane in Australia, I'm boarding a plane, I get an email from him saying, "Hey, I read your book. And it was great to read that story because it just that moment came flooding back to me." And then he spent the next, I don't know how many hundred words, it was a really long email, explaining to me how he wasn't a consultant anymore, and all of the value-based deals. It's not even value-based pricing. Like, an opportunity would come to him, and instead of selling some hours or selling some days, he would think about, well, here, what are the possibilities here? And then he would propose something that had him like getting equity in the business. So he owned pieces of businesses now, or getting paid 6 and 7 figures based on deliverables. And these things were starting to pay off for him. So in the time that last conversation I had with him, he was a consultant billing days, and he's just been completely transformed. So now when somebody comes to him and says, "I have this problem, I want to talk to you about engaging you to help me," he's not thinking like somebody who wants to sell some hours or to sell a solution. He's thinking like an entrepreneur who sees a possible business partner and a way to create huge amounts of value for both his client or potential partner and himself. And I was just so struck by that transformation. And the moment I read that email, I found myself being similarly transformed.
Yeah, I think that's what some of the really successful firms today have. And while they still may be a mix of hours and all these other things, but you look at giant design firms like IDEO, what's their hourly rate, right? I don't think they have one.
Yeah.
They just come in and say, this is what it's going to cost to solve your problem.
Yeah, and I can think of firms who've taken equity in clients' businesses or been paid based on results. And some of them, I know, I was just listening to a podcast today, and this one firm I did some work for many years ago, one of their big clients is now worth $5 billion. And they were in designing the product on the ground floor. So, I mean, just some of these numbers are just insane. Yeah. And, if you just sold hours, where would you be? And where would the client be? Would the product be anywhere near as good as it is today?
And so you do a lot of training with the sales folks, and what's been your experience in terms of when you're coming into an organization and you're coaching people around these types of concepts? What are some of the initial kind of pushback you get? Is it based on a culture piece? Is it a process thing? What's usually some of the areas that you have to start dismantling first?
Well, I think the longer that you've been in the vendor position, like the firm and really the individuals who are on the front lines selling and pricing the engagements, the longer you've operated from the vendor position, the harder it is to actually begin thinking like and seeing yourself as the expert, and therefore operating from that expert position. So I would say that's the biggest one. And you mentioned we work with salespeople. We do, but I think the key to our business, what we're really good at, is not so much, there are other sales training organizations that are more like, I would consider them to be real sales training organizations. And some might laugh at that I don't put us in the same category.
Sure.
Like, we, more than understanding selling, we understand kind of the vulnerable person who is a creative person first and finds themselves in a situation where they have to sell and price. So,
right.
So we understand that. So we work with people who would never hire a sales trainer or a sales consultant. They just wouldn't, because there's just something icky about it. There's something about the methods they're being asked to use that just doesn't sit well with them. The person who's teaching it doesn't understand their business. So our clients tend to be artists and entrepreneurs first, and
so they're more accidental salespeople.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think those are the people that probably need it the most, right? They're the ones that are kind of stuck and have one leg in the delivery side and the other in the sales and operations side of the running their business.
Yeah, and I think sales is a noble profession when it's done well. But I don't there's not a lot of personal satisfaction for me or my team in helping people who see themselves as salespeople become better salespeople.
Mm-hmm.
We're really driven by people who don't see themselves by helping people who don't see themselves as salespeople and like helping them in their most vulnerable moment. And like I always say to my team, we're in the empowerment business. Like most of what we do is we just say, you can do this.
Right.
They're just giving it all away.
Yeah, that's
it's thousands of dollars, and we'll say, you can do this. You got this. And then provide some frameworks and some support. But
sure,
that's it.
Yeah, I think an interesting part to that, at least from my experience, is like I do a lot of sales stuff, but I'm by trade a programmer, developer. And Nil's also my co-founder. He's a designer, and so we do a lot of sales together. And I think this style definitely fits sort of the more like earnest sort of approach. I think that someone that isn't a natural salesperson sort of has. Not to say that most salespeople aren't, honest or that way, but it definitely I think fits the personalities a little bit better, and I feel like it maybe fits the approach a little bit. It makes it a little easier.
And we just have this natural empathy for creators. Like I really believe people in the creative professions, they are this creator archetype. They were put on this earth to create. They were called to their professions. They are meant to do this. And I don't know. There's just maybe I see myself as a creator too, more a writer than anything else. But I just I like the idea of building a business around helping those people.
The thing that I think I took the most away from the book was not only the great information that's in there, but the vision of what could come out of making this sort of change in your business can do for the people you're working with, the extra value it can give to your client, but also the longevity it can give to your business as being looked at as a strategic partner versus a bidding vendor.
I think firms that get trapped in the vendor position, they just don't. Some of them, it's really hard. It's hard for them to even try on what it's like to be seen as kind of the expert or even just the equal partner, and to get paid based on value and to have a seat at kind of the big kid table at the C-suite on the client side of things, and to be allowed to lead. Like if you've sold from the vendor position for a long time, it's hard to even imagine that this is possible. I get a lot of like, nice theory, Blair, but in my business, you don't understand my market or my business. And it's not their market or their business for most of the time. It's the mental blocks that come from having been locked into that position and mindset for too long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the one thing I know that you mentioned, and I heard you talk about this on the Two Bobs podcast, was about where people will let you know that in our culture, in this part of the country, we don't talk about money. Like for example, right? Like they've built up all these kind of auto magical responses to anybody attacking that sort of position.
Yeah. Everywhere. And I think I said in the podcast, I once had somebody say, "Oh, you don't understand. In Saudi Arabia, we don't talk about money." I wasn't in Saudi. I was in Dubai, but I've heard it everywhere. And it's a mental thing.
Yeah.
No, you don't talk about money because you confused what your mom told you about the impoliteness of having money conversations in a personal situation with the need to have money conversations in a business context.
Right. And so one of the other things that you touch on in the book, but I also feel like is really important, also byproduct of this, besides as I mentioned, what I feel like the culture and the reputation, but you talk about innovation. Having this sort of model really allows for you to kind of free your mind around the possibilities of not just innovating for your clients, but innovating within your own firm.
Yeah, and I think the first time people read that idea that efficiencies come at the cost of innovation. So by efficiencies, trying to bill as many hours as possible, that one of the trade-offs in the pursuit of efficiency